Josh, welcome back to the podcast. And I'm glad you're back so soon because there's a topic, or at least a research note that you put into our system, M42, a number of months ago that I thought was particularly insightful and that I really wanted to have a conversation with you about. And it has to do with the notion of, just very basically, what are some of the sources of competitive advantages? And then specifically data as a competitive advantage and how that might change. So can you set the stage for us? Why is this something that you're grappling with today?
To take a step back, this notion of data being a competitive advantage, I think it's been around since the time of Google. If you go back to how Google search engine works, I think we've been aware of this kind of data flywheel where more data on consumers equates to better search results, better targeting, and so this concept of data being an advantage has been here for at least over a decade. Neural networks, machine learning, these have been around for decades. I think I've listened to podcasts on this before. I think all these concepts have been designed, I think, at least 3 or 4 decades or even more. So, don't shoot me if I'm wrong. But the general idea is that every generation there is, new model architectures being introduced, and this continually enhances the importance of data. And perhaps why we're having this conversation is, the buzzword of the year, LLMs, large language models. And this is just another kind of architecture that has been, kind of discovered in the recent years. And what is done is that it's an improvement on the neural networks that we've already been using for some time. And with the transformer architecture, it further allows, people to throw in more data and for that to be even better output. And I think it's most clear to the consumer now when you talk to ChatGPT. If you've used it maybe 2 years ago, and the research team has been playing around with this for at least 2 to 3 years, we've seen step changes in the quality of output. And it all boils down to parameter count. Because there's more parameter count. And of course, the models themselves, there's been some architecture changes and some innovations on reasoning. But in general, you're training the model with more and more parameters, and the output quality is continuing to scale. And so that's kind of the underlying thoughts behind why we're thinking about data and what it means for moats.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Google, and I think it's a great example as one that's very familiar to all of us. But, even thinking back to Google's founding, it's not just these tech companies that have really built serious competitive advantages and real business models around this notion of data. And with, you mentioned the quality and the availability of data increasing really with the dawn of the internet age. It's far beyond the tech sector where we've seen these types of advantages accrue.
It's not just the tech sector. In the finance sector, on the FinTech side of things, we are also observing how you have kind of new business models that are more tech native, and they are coming out. They're approaching the lending vector with a blank sheet of paper, and hey, if this is the 21st century, how would we do lending, right? So we have fintech companies like Kaspi, like Bajaj, and then and then even some of the banks that we own, like they're also kind of migrating from old school credit bureaus that were just based on a couple of data points about a person, like his salary, where they work, etc. And they're now embracing the era of data, right? Because there's so much data that's available, and how do we use all these data points to better inform our decisions? So it's not just like tech companies; it's gone into your fintech finance companies. It's also going into, this is pseudo tech, but like e-commerce, right? Like how it's targeting people. That's also partly data driven, and that's on the B2C side. On the B2B side, there's how corporates make decisions, your ERP companies, and a whole bunch of SaaS companies. It's all built around data, and how do we use data for an advantage? And then, of course, don't get me talking about defense. I can do a whole podcast on data and defense. I won't do that today. But even in the defense space, I was just at Ryan Mattel's Investor Day, and they were showing how they're incorporating data and analytics into helping the militaries better target and automate kind of the war fighting. And ultimately, like it improves the decision and speed of decisions. I think that's the key with data in any field, and that results in most of the time better outcomes for businesses.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking in the sports world, you've seen how data and data analytics have really reshaped the way that decision making takes place, both in terms of how games are played, in-game decision making. So it's really everywhere. But you mentioned earlier just the notion of, hey, LLMs, step change in terms of how we need to think about data advantages. Can you give us a framework for how you think of what a robust data advantage or a data moat looks like today? And are there characteristics of a particular data advantage that you're really looking for as you scan the world for investment opportunities?
Yeah, good question, Rob. I think there is 4 key points here. So when we think about data moats, and so number one, it is like, is it unique, exclusive, proprietary data? Number 2 is the data continuously refreshed or dynamic? Number 3 is it high dimensional interactive data? And number 4 is closed loop data. And it can be any of these 4, just to clarify that they're mutually exclusive. Like having one of the 4 is very good. You may not have all 4 together, but those are the 4 key points that I have in mind when thinking about data and data moats.
Okay, and I presume that underlying all this is the data actually has to be useful to somebody for it to have value. I might have a whole bunch of chicken scratch on my notepad here, but it's largely useless information.
Precisely. I mean, there's no point having unique data that's useless.
Yes. Well, can we unpack each of those 4 categories, starting with that unique piece?
Yeah. So proprietary data, the easiest example that everyone would be familiar with is the social graph. The information that Meta, Instagram, Facebook, WeChat has on you and your social network, and your likes and dislikes. That is very, very valuable data. And I think the easiest analogy here is that there was a study done in 10 years ago in 2015 that said that with about 300 likes or interactions on Facebook, a company is able to know you better than your spouse. So I find it very funny because it's probably true. And how many of you out there have you're getting shown ads or stuff that is like really in line with what you're thinking, and sometimes it's even able to. It's spooky. It's like it can figure out what you like before you even figure out you like it. So I think that's the social graph at play. There's also interaction logs, which is kind of a bit of an overlap with social graph. So what you're searching for on Google, on Amazon, even what you hover on when you're scrolling on a feed, I think all that gets logged somewhere. There are like data tags associated with it. And so from the consumer side, that's proprietary data that a few companies have that is difficult to replicate, but very useful. Outside of consumer, let's talk about pharmaceuticals. Like we have real world test data, like scientific data that is, when you're folding molecules or when you're trying out different combinations of molecules, like do they work, do they not work, that sits somewhere within our pharmaceutical companies. And that's proprietary and unique. And you would have to replicate a ton of experiments to get that same data set. And the last category here would be like sensor data. So you think about Tesla, self-driving cars. There's a lot of data that went into training these vehicles, right? So, and even SpaceX, when they recover their rockets, there's like trial and error, but there's unique proprietary data from all the sensors on the rockets for it to be able to land so precisely. So that's number one, is the proprietary data set that is a valuable moat.
And then that makes a lot of sense. I think that's long been the case. Your second category was just data sets that get refreshed frequently. It seems to me like that might be an area in which AI has changed the notion of what that moat might look like. Am I right?
Yes, to some extent, I think there is debate going on here. And maybe let me inform the user what would continuously refresh data look like. I think the easiest example to give would be on the FinTech or lending side of things. You need data that is up to date. You do not want my credit score from 3 years ago or even 2 years ago. You want it like right now. What's Josh, most up to date credit scoring, and And even credit scoring, that like the data being captured has evolved over time. It used to be very simplistic, one or two data points, or not one or two, but maybe less than 10. And now with more sensors out there, I'm using the term very loosely, stuff like where you live, your cell phone logs, where you spend most of your time, all that, whatever can be measured can be taken in, and it can be fed into a model with like more variables, and it's probably able to give you a better understanding of like the credit profile of the person, the risk level of the person. And doesn't end there. Also, it goes on into classified. So if you think about online classifieds, like you want to buy a car, you want to buy a house, you need the most current data. You don't want last year's catalog, right? So these are examples where you need up-to-date, continuously refreshed data.
Just to stay on the second one for a second, am I right in thinking that a data moat that, like the frequency of those updates is that much more important today for that data moat to be as strong as it was maybe 10 or 20 years ago?
I think it's always been important. So I think what has changed, like what we talked about earlier, was the introduction of LLMs, right? I don't think that changes the frequency of update, because whether like buying a house, right? Pre LLMs and after LLMs, it's probably the same. Where LLMs would come in is maybe the user interface, or the way that you buy the house could evolve. So you can imagine now going onto one of these like online classified websites and specifying, hey, I want a house that has, I don't know, 5 windows, 2 doors, nice mountain view, and far away from a main road, and so it's more a different overlay that goes on top of that. But I think the frequency, in my opinion, should be the same.
The next two categories, or the last two categories, should I say?
Yes.
Those are terms I was less familiar with. Can we start with the first one?
Sure. So, this is very interesting, because I got these concepts from two gentlemen who are building an agentic AI software company, and it's called Axiom. It's very interesting because these guys have been working in like, one of them is formerly from Databricks. And so Databricks, for your information, is one of the data warehouses behind, I can't give you the name, but it's behind one of the best LLMs. So it's the most frontier technology. And, it was explained to me by them. So the first category is high dimensional interaction data. And so let's kind of demystify the word. So in a simple term, high dimensional means large variable, and it's interactive data. So you can think about this as, it's not just transaction logs, but it is also like communication. It can be between buyers and suppliers. It can be between customer and the company. It can be also even how human agents like resolve problems that have come up. And this is very valuable data because it's multi-variable. It's not like it's not fixed and defined, because it is like, let's say solving a problem, right? Let's say a customer service log. It's always going to be, it's the same, but it's also slightly different every time. So it's multiple variables, and it's interactive. And with this data, it is it kind of overlaps with the unique proprietary data, but the additional caveat is the interactive portion and how it has so many variables. And so this enables you, especially in the age of LLMs, you can then have much better outcomes because you're dealing with real world situations. And this is, I think we're just at the starting point here, because this is more B2B. Everything that you and me use on ChatGPT that's very B2C is kind of a single one, it's like a one-way kind of interaction, right? But here it's on a B2B level. If you think 5 years from now, how are companies going to employ agentic AI? You need more of these kind of data sets for it to be useful. The second category, and it's there's a bit of overlap here, it's called closed loop. So action and outcome combined together. So having a data set that encompasses action and outcome. And why this is valuable is because you have the feedback loop is in the data. So that taking a certain action results in a certain outcome, right? So it can be like, for example, in a procurement process, if you're going to get an agentic AI to eventually help your procurement team, you need to know, hey, historically, these are the items we have procured, And then you need to track, like, okay, 5 years from now, what were the outcomes? Like which equipment broke down early, which did not, stuff like that. And that once again gives you a very rich data set that you will be able to train your AI with. And why I bring this up is because I think a lot of focus right now is on B2C because it's the most clear and evident. But B2B, there is so much data that is still unlocked. Like we're just scratching the surface here. And the reality is that it's going to take time because firstly, the corporates need to get the data in place first. So you can't apply agentic AI if you don't have the data sets ready to use. So, but these are broadly the 4 categories of data which, when we think about moats, right, over the long term, having this data and having it like ready to use, that's going to give company an advantage.
Okay, and like you said at the outset, having one of them is great, but having multiple of these things and if they can interact is even better with respect to the strength of that data moat. Can I ask you just the flip side? So as we've seen advancements with LLMs, where are we seeing erosion in what might have historically been considered a pretty strong data moat, but where those competitive advantages are perhaps no longer as strong as they might have been?
See, it's once again linked to the first part. So we talked about dynamic data, right? So on the flip side, static data or slow-moving kind of data or knowledge, that's probably more easy to disrupt. And so, what we've seen now and even in our portfolio is, databases like scientific journals, legal data, even medical data. And I mean to caveat it because there is a difference between what I mentioned earlier on, like when you're doing like there's scientific data for drug discovery that's like proprietary, but then there's like the medical data, like, hey, when you have certain indications, is it likely, what disease is it likely to be? That's more open source. And so if the data is publicly available, I think, there's risk that your LLMs, which are trained basically on all of humanity's knowledge, is somewhere in there. Because, right now, I think we're at the point that we've exhausted all the written word that humanity has had collectively. So somewhere in the LLM's parameter count when it was training these models is data on some legal issues. There's also data on probably like medical issues, and so I think like this data that is slow moving in nature, it doesn't change from time to time. Like classifying if someone has a flu, right? It's like the indication is not going to change. It's not going to evolve that rapidly, right? So that is one example. And so there has been debate, I think, for like Wolters Kluwer and Relax around the are these business going to be affected? And we can always dive into that if you want, but like these are examples where there's some question marks around data and the moat around the data. How useful is it really?
Okay, and I imagine another category might be, okay, the data is not out there, but it can be almost synthesized based on data that's out there.
Yes, and this is very interesting because like I attended a conference earlier this year, and there was a startup company, I think it's called Hippocratic AI, and the founder was saying that, hey, your ChatGPT actually can diagnose most of your diseases. And in fact, I think a few days ago, Mana shared in our on our channel that there was actually a study done that basically verified this statement, because your general purpose LLM can outperform even your specialized LLMs in diagnosing diseases. And you can think of it as the Mosaic theory, right? So even though the LLM doesn't have access to some of these proprietary data sets, like because it's trained on so much stuff, it can piece together enough information to give you outcomes that are pretty decent. And it's not just in medical, and even in stuff that is paywall, if you try hard enough and you just put the content there, you can reverse engineer like probably what's behind the paywall if you wanted to. So like it's the Mosaic theory, and the fact that the newest models are so good at reasoning, they can figure stuff out without having access to the full information. So so that's the other risk. And I think this is more like a generalist kind of approach where the general models are getting very good at this, especially with the reasoning function.
How do you think about the criticality of a data to a customer? Because I can imagine if yeah, if the LLM can synthesize and get 98% of the way there in most cases, as the stakes go up to your customer, that 2% can be really costly. So does the criticality of the data to a customer's business processes matter too in this context?
If you talk about Wolters Kluwer and Relax, right? You're talking about legal, medical kind of data. There's little room for error, and there's an element of trust. So it's criticality, and it's like on a B2B level, there's like a level of trust. Like, will you get fired for using ChatGPT to diagnose a patient, or are you better off using what you've previously the previous vendor you've been using for the past 20 years? So on one hand, and this is quite interesting because in theory the data moat is like the data is widely available, it's easy to synthesize, but this is beyond the moat of these companies. Don't just lie in data. There is the trust element that is also very important, and especially in B2B settings, that's worth something. So like once again, like data is just one possible moat. There could be many other moats that the company has. And so, yeah, in some of our companies, the data side is being attacked, but they're not one trick pony. Like there's other stuff. And, having the customer relationships, like on a B2B level, that is quite difficult to do. Like getting that, what's it called?
That stickiness, that trust and reputation takes time to build.
Yeah.
Josh, in your view, as you look out at the world, what company or set of companies are best positioned with respect to a data advantage? Or put differently, like where are you seeing the most formidable data advantages out there in the world today?
So if we go back to that list of the 4 key points that I mentioned on, proprietary data, dynamic data, high dimension interaction data, and closed loop data, I'm in the international equity team, so my expertise is more ex-North America. So the easiest one for me is probably Tencent. If you think about it, they, firstly, to begin with, they have data on 1.3 billion consumers in China. That's a huge amount. If you think of all that 4 categories, they have all 4. The data is proprietary. They have the social graph, for example. It's continuously refreshed. They have transaction data. So Tencent is not just a WhatsApp of China. They have the payment rails. They're like the Visa of China. And so they have all the transaction data that's continuously refreshed. They have high dimension interaction data. So, Tencent has mini programs. I think they have like 10 million corporates or mini program kind of businesses. And there's a huge amount of corporates that are sitting on their platform. And there's interaction data between the mini programs and the customers, and even the chat logs, right? Because it's all getting captured within the Tencent ecosystem. So they have that high dimension interaction data. And is it closed loop? Yeah, all of it is closed loop. So they, from the whole point of like what Tencent is trying to do in e-commerce is that because they own the top of funnel. So top of funnel is when you first start interacting or thinking about like having some purchase intent, all the way down to purchasing something. Tencent owns the customer journey right from the start to the end. And this is different from, say, like e-commerce, where e-commerce is, most of the time is bottom of funnel. So they have to acquire you by, placing ads on TikTok or Instagram. Tencent kind of owns the whole stack. And so it's closed loop from start to finish. And so if you think of all those 4 categories, they have all of it. And so that's a very good starting point. And then, but it doesn't end there. And, to the point on that, businesses can have many modes. If you think about where is LLMs or this whole, agentic AI kind of development going to go, I think one thing I'm very excited about is, AI agents that can help you do like stuff. Think about booking a holiday, think about, shopping for you. Like, hey, I need to top up my fridge. So you take a photo of your fridge, and the AI agent kind of knows that, yeah, what's missing, what's not. And it goes out and does your shopping for you. For this to happen, you need to have permissioning, because in most ecosystems, like, let's use WhatsApp, for example, Meta, right? Meta they own you as the consumer. You have their apps, you have Instagram, WhatsApp. But they do not own the payment rails. They do not own the e-commerce. So they will need permission for their AI agent to then, interact with Visa, Master, or maybe Amazon to go and buy your grocery. In Tencent's case, because they own the full stack, and they have 10 million kind of mini program businesses on it. In theory, they could facilitate that whole transaction seamlessly, like from start to finish. And I think that's very valuable because that they don't have to ask for permission from a third-party app. It's all in their platform. So the permissioning is done. They have the payment rails to facilitate transactions. And so when you think of the next step in AI, for me, I think this is not immediate. I think there's a lot of problems that need to be solved. But AI agents, they can take economic action. That's where we're going. And I think, Tencent's very well positioned for that. And it's not really something that's been focused on by the street right now. I think in the near term, so what I've talked about is the vision is like, oh yeah, maybe 5 years from now we'll get there. But even in the near term, AI is already having, or LLMs has already been having a big impact on them because Tencent has multiple kind of apps within its app. So they're most well known for WeChat, but they have Tencent Video, they have the games business, and they have data on different users that are being collected. But historically, it's very difficult to unify all this data. But with LLMs, I'm being told that it's ushering in a new era because you can basically, take, all of Rob's interactions across different platforms. And instead of having to do patchwork of, algorithms to try to unify all of them together, you just throw all your data into a kind of LLM model and on Rob, and it's going to figure out, hey, this is all the stuff Rob likes, and we can target him better. And so that's what is in the next couple of quarters, you're probably seeing a continuation of this trend where Tencent is able to grow ad revenue, double digits despite China having horrible macroeconomic conditions because they're getting better and better at targeting. So, be it short term or long term, I think there's a very nice story that's playing out there for Tencent, and it all boils down to data.
Okay, and just the sheer amount of data that Tencent collects on its customers, given the products that they've rolled out over the years and the capture that they've had, it all sounds extremely compelling. I imagine there are risks though as well to, whether it's data privacy or just, are you seeing, and you've seen this in the US, but just like data concerns, privacy concerns, does that not become that much more important, as you mentioned, as all these disparate data sets can interact together? I mean, there's a part of it that's really scary, right?
Yes, I totally agree with you because I think we're reaching the point where these things will probably know more about you than not even your spouse, but you yourself. Like, it's able to, you can ask ChatGPT, like, for your I think Mayer's Briggs profile, and it's able to guess that based on your interactions, and so you can imagine, like, if this thing is collecting, and it's not just Tencent, I think it's all the tech companies, right? The amount of data they collect is stuff that even your subconscious, it's down to mapping what's going on in your subconscious mind because it's manifesting in how you're clicking, in how you're scrolling. So yeah, I think data privacy is a very real issue. For Tencent specifically, I think they're actually quite ahead of the curve here, like, because historically WeChat has been run by a guy called Alan Zhang, and he's been very conservative with sharing the data with the rest of the group. So if anything, I think, like, it's kind of, they've been putting the brakes on that. I mean, very conservative with how they're monetizing it. But in general, I think the direction is that they have to, if they don't do it, someone else is going to do it. And I think they're probably aware of that. But yeah, I think this is it's almost like an ethical question, right? Because like, how much is too much for this? And yeah, it's like, I think the amount of data being collected allows people to really map your subconscious. I think that's really scary. It's like the idea behind, if you think of short video, it's basically like, in some cases, I think I've heard that, like, people are being shown stuff, like, for e-commerce that they didn't even know they want, but somehow they want it, right? So, like, yeah, so I don't know where this goes, but that's just data science at work, right? Because it's taking all these data points and trying to make sense out of it. And we humans I think we are reaching the point where we do not understand how these models work.
I'm struck that you chose Tencent as a company that has, I think the question was, the most formidable one, and that's the one that came top of mind for you. What strikes me about that is that that's not new, meaning I think that's always been a feature of Tencent. And, part of the discussion today has been just, okay, how does the nature of a data moat shift in a world of LLMs? Should I interpret from your comment that despite changes, and we started a discussion actually with Google, the so-called Magnificent Seven are those that really capitalized on, creating platforms that really harnessed a vast array of data. Should I interpret that, in your view, despite some real shifts occurring right now in terms of what a data advantage is, that it's those incumbents that are probably best positioned for the era going forward?
Yes, I think that's kind of fair. I think Google, we've internally we've held this for a while. We've talked about it. I think some of my colleagues think that Google is probably better than Tencent, and I haven't looked at it in depth enough for me to give an informed opinion. But from what I've heard and the debates we have going on in our Teams chat, I think it seems reasonable because they, on top of like all the stuff that Tencent has, they also own like the TPUs, right? So they own the stuff, down to the hardware where they are designing the TPUs. But yes, I think the Magnificent Seven, or at least some of them, are in pole position. Now, the caveat here is that will there be a platform shift in the way in which people interact with these LLMs? I think that's the risk for all these companies, including Tencent. So being pole position doesn't guarantee you win. It means you have a head start. The odds are in their favor. But to answer your question is, yes, the odds are in their favor, but it's not a sure win, because you've seen ChatGPT come out. It's become a verb kind of, where I'm going to ChatGPT this.
We've
right?
probably used it 20 times on this podcast.
Exactly. So, and it's not, we should be using, I'm going to LLM this, right? Or something like that, but we're not. So, I think that's an example where if there is a new platform coming out, and it could even be like AR, VR glasses, right? Where the way in which people interact with the world changes, then these incumbents will need to be fast to adapt to that trend and make sure they are on it. Or if, so for example, if AR, VR glasses comes on and WeChat is not part of that communication process for you to speak to someone else, and that becomes the de facto kind of mode of communication, then Tencent's in trouble. And, similar for Google, Meta, if the way in which people use, interact with these apps changes over time, that's the big risk for them. But that said, they have data, they have all the data. So they basically, the conditions are in their favor right now, and, they have to screw up on execution in order to really kind of lose the race. Okay.
Fascinating. Well, Josh, I think this is podcast number 3 for you and I for this year. Hope we have 3 more next year. It's always a pleasure speaking with you and hearing your thoughts. Thanks.
Thanks for having me on board. Thank you. Take care.